Okay. So thank you very much for arriving, everyone. We have Jungwoo Ryo, also known as JR, here. We are going to be talking about how to learn how to build secure software and distinguish your code. No, we're not going to write code today. No, we're not going to jump deep into it. We're going to get the insights of JR, who's been in the field a long time, knows what this is all about. Of course, as I've mentioned before, I am not the guru. JR is. As you all know, we're a training company. We love getting education out into the world and to people so that they really do get better at what they're doing in their careers. And that's for all of those of you who are staying tuned to what we do. This week we are launching an entirely new interface, which is exciting. It's deep. It's got challenges. It's got all sorts of content with JR as a contributor. And with that, all I want to do is just really jump into Ask JR. Tell us a little about yourself, about how you got into technology, some of your training and experience, and frankly, some of your interests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity, Paul. And my story could be interesting because, I started as an international student and I got interested in computer science. So I got all my degrees in computer science and I focused on software engineering for my PhD. So that's how I got started with software engineering. And before that, my degree program focused on networking and telecommunications. So one thing I want to share with you is this kind of diverse background is very helpful, especially in your IT career aspirations, because all these things sort of come together at the end of the day.
Yeah, very interesting. Sometimes people don't have that impression.
Yeah.
That, how do you go from being an English major, which in your case you were not, but how do you go from being an English major or political science or someone who's never gone to college, and how do you end up in technology as successful? So, yeah, tell us more about some of whether your PhD or some what really struck you. What was that aha moment when you thought this is for me?
So I do have industry experience because I was a software engineer for several years. And while I was working, I was pursuing my PhD at the same time. Mm-hmm. And that's why I ended up in the academia eventually. But I started as a software engineer, and I was introduced to cybersecurity later, much later, when I started my job as a faculty member. Mm-hmm. And I started teaching cybersecurity, and one day it actually hit me. I do research in cybersecurity. I also do research in, software engineering. Mm-hmm. The intersection is software security. So right. It's sort of an aha moment for me, and that's how I got really started with delving into software engineering research and especially software security research. Right. And that's how I got started with software security. But I also started teaching software security. Mm-hmm. So that's how I really got started.
Yeah. One of the things I found is always interesting when you dealt with technology, and obviously including with our release this week, is that everyone says you got to get it out there, got to get it out there, got to get it out there. And of course, there are many epic software failures and examples of that. I mean, frankly, it's not humorous; it's sad on some level. But if you search for epic software failures or security breaches, I mean, there's just an unlimited number from Equifax and Canva and LinkedIn and Marriott and MySpace. I mean, going back in the day. But there are just so many. And why, in your experience, having been in the in the world, the professional world where people see these things done, do you think that the failures are due for lack of a better word, technical issues or cultural issues? Meaning they made a mistake and they said we got to get it out there versus we have to get it right.
Yeah. I mean, all of us, we are always, constantly under pressure, and I think software industry is not an exception, and you have to meet the deadlines, and in an ideal situation, of course, you can take your time to finish your project, and you can get basically extensions and all those types of things, but in reality, that's not the case. So we always feel a little rushed.
Right.
And it almost feels like a luxury when you're trying to basically promote this idea of software security. And that's one of the reasons I think why we're forced to just forget about something like security. We call it, quality attribute in software engineering, and there are other types of quality attributes like performance and those types of things. But security is one of those quality attributes people, tend to not pay attention to too much while developing their software. But then, after the fact, when the software is released, it becomes a huge issue. And like you said, one factor that characterizes a software project as a failure is not being able to pay attention to those types of things, bigger picture type of things like software security or performance or reliability, or all those types of things. So one of the things, I really try to tell my students and anybody I work with, especially those coming from industry, is that you want to build your software security into the project from the very beginning. If you start thinking about security after the fact, it's too late. You may have to even redo the project in some cases.
Right.
So yeah,
and I think that
you end up spending a lot more money too, and you may also damage your reputation there too.
Right. So what is it from your point of view? Obviously, to in small teams, often even in a huge company, there's small teams, and cross-functional teams are always great to have, but sometimes the resources aren't there, and you're getting out a new project. How does that part, which is just what you pointed out, sort of weaving both the security, let's call it mindset, the cultural element that I was talking, as well as the technical elements right at the beginning. What do you do? What is the let's pick a person's role. What is the project leader, the scrum master? Who is the person? What do they do to ensure that it is a vital part of the thinking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's sort of an educational type of thing there too, because you have to really emphasize the importance of those types of things, especially something like software security from the very beginning. And also, you want to tell your team members that you care about something like software security. And if you don't even mention it during the project, then nobody will pay any attention to something like software security, because that's not how you sort of get recognized by your leader. So I think as a leader, especially as a person like software architect, you want to make it very clear from the very beginning and say that you really care about these quality attributes, especially something like software security, and not just talking about it, but also provide these specific steps to weave security into like each and every phase of your software development process. So I think you not only just give them sort of a motivation, but also give the concrete steps and measures to follow up.
So at every release, even at every sprint, if you're doing sprints of 2 weeks, let's say at a time, part of that maybe one of the actors in the sprint needs to be someone whose responsibility is to both push into the process a security review, because from what I have determined from my own experiences, that if you, and not a fraction of which is your experience is much greater, is that you don't do that, you can destroy not only your software, you can destroy the relationship of the company to the customer, and you can therefore destroy the business. So
and another big piece I think is education, and that's what you specialize in, and I specialize in. And you have to understand what software security is. Right, so that's how you can, constantly think about software security while you're doing your coding or you're working on your project. But I think education is another very important, ingredient there to ensure security in your software development projects.
So one of the things we're going to be doing, and you're participating in this, is we're launching these challenges. In something like Kaggle, where people can go out and do challenges and they get data sets, it's purely really limited to the data science world. What we're going to be launching as one of our first sets are the cybersecurity challenges, and we're talking to one of the major organizations. I won't announce that today, about collaborating so that we can put out a series of challenges. And let me get to the issue about how, it's one thing for you to do a challenge within your own business, but now let's say you're interviewing for a company. This is one of the premises we put out here is how do you demonstrate, and I don't mean just to your colleagues, but to a future employer, that you think and you behave that in a mindset and in a process and a way of doing things, that cybersecurity will be top of mind. What do you think? What are some of the messages you might want to send out if you were a potential new employee or a potential new hire in an interview setting? What kind of things do you want to hear as an executive sitting there?
Yeah, I think one thing I'm going to be looking for is any kind of knowledge and software security from the person. And I think one of the ways to demonstrate your knowledge is to have maybe a certification. So one such certification, if you just want to show them you have knowledge in cybersecurity, one of the most, I think, basic fundamental ones out there, I think it's called Security Plus. So there is a certification like that, but there are also software security specific certifications.
Sure.
And this is where things get a little tricky because there are just so many different types of certifications out there, as you know.
Right.
And for example, there are like domain specific ones, like only focusing on web application development, right? Or a lot of these certifications revolve around different languages because there are different things you have to pay attention to when it comes to software security, especially in terms of what language you are using, right? So each language probably has its own sort of certification tied to it. So there are so many choices, but I think you should be able to show these relevant certifications and credentials to the person who you are being interviewed by.
Yeah. So one of the things that in these challenges that we're going to be doing is allowing people to share their challenge. So some of the challenges are going to be short, 15 minutes. Some of them are longer, an hour. But in all these cases, it's demonstration. We've brought on a group of 3 new developers recently, and the reason we brought them on was kind of easy. The interview process was fairly easy. Besides them being very nice people, which is obviously one of our criteria. I think most companies would say that. The criteria is that they demonstrated they had the ability to do a complex challenge, and the challenge was not obvious. So, some challenges are, simple example, can you open the window? Yeah. So, what if the challenge is, can you open the window, and the window does not have anything that looks like a latch that would allow you to open it? So, the questions are the kind of questions Microsoft is well known for, and Amazon and Apple and all the major players, Google, are known for giving you a challenge which is not really so obvious that they're asking you the right question. And I think that's sort of an interesting point to ask you. In cybersecurity, if there was an A, B, and C, then we'd all be able to get it right? You go to A, we go to B, we go to C, checked all 3, we're done. Well, what about the sort of the unknowns, the thing that we don't know that we don't know? There are tools, right? And there are a whole series of tools that cybersecurity professionals can use. Do you have any specific tools that you've used that you found particularly useful in trying to, find holes, or what are the ways in which you look at cybersecurity? I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, and I think IT in general is a very tool-rich environment, and cybersecurity is not an exception. And part of becoming an expert in cybersecurity is learning and being proficient with those types of tools out there.
Right.
And software security is, I would say, the same way. But I mean, tools are a lot of times software packages and those types of things, but they also come in different form. So, for example, like what are the tools you can use conceptually to design your software securely?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to understand those types of conceptual tools too. So in this case, we use concepts like tactics, or another big, I think, thing in software engineering is design patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And believe it or not, we have something called security patterns. So there are a bunch of those security patterns out there you can learn about and master. And I think one thing we're trying to avoid in software engineering in general, and also software security in particular, is to reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I think, is really the key to success. You're trying to reuse these ideas as much as possible. I mean, good ideas and proven ideas as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, I think using things like secure design patterns to improve your software security. We have different flavors of design patterns, like architectural patterns and lower level design patterns and those types of things. So getting familiar with those types of things, so that when you start thinking about incorporating software security more into your project, you already have solutions presented to you. So that way.
I mean, I haven't been exposed, obviously, to that as you have, of course. Can you talk a little about some, whether design patterns or security design patterns, and how you think about them? And I say it's kind of funny sometimes when you've been in, call it, interview settings or meeting settings, and you don't need to be, and I'm not saying that someone should ever be deceptive, but sometimes you can drop a few words that indicate something, even if you don't know it as well, and then when someone comes back to you and asks, so what kind of, and I used to call this the executive dictionary, you come up with the executive dictionary of terms that are relevant to the business. So talk about design patterns and security design patterns a little bit, and maybe kind of an executive dictionary of someone, and by the way, by establishing some of these things for people now, obviously then they can go get the education around that. But talk a little about that, the key phrases and the key terms in that world.
Yeah, some of the things I do in my courses, I mean, especially in the very beginning, is to introduce these fundamental concepts and terms. And I mean, part of becoming an expert is learning the language being used by the people in the industry.
Right.
And for example, when I teach something like networking, students complain about, why do we have to learn about all these concepts? But that's how you're able to communicate with your, colleagues eventually if you become an expert. So software security, I think, is the same way. It's, part of it is becoming familiar with these terms being used in the field. So just to give an idea, we have this concept, this single access point, right? So that's cybersecurity type of term too, but in software security, we use that concept in the form of design pattern. So instead of introducing many of ways getting to this whatever piece of software, we try to limit the number of access points whenever we try to develop, a piece of software. So it's sort of a common sense thing when you think about it, right? When you build a building, if you have, 10 doors, it's less secure than a building with only one door, that type of thing. So, but as soon as you say something like single access point, people may be thinking, oh, this guy knows a little bit about at least, cybersecurity. Yeah. Or if you start talking about quality attributes or design patterns and security patterns and, static analysis or dynamic analysis, those types of things, that definitely shows that you are knowledgeable about software security in general. So I think learning the terminology really is critical, essential. And that way, let's say you're not just, but you are a software engineer without any kind of knowledge in cybersecurity, but when you try to communicate with your colleagues with more cybersecurity background, you will be running into a brick wall.
Yeah.
But if you are at least aware of some of these terms and understanding the concepts, I think the conversation could flow much, much more smoothly.
Yeah.
So I think, a lot of times we just neglect learning these essential concepts.
Right.
But it makes a huge difference, I would say.
No, actually, I was talking with Dan Sullivan about cloud in one of our prior Meet the Gurus, and we talked about this, and I related to him, as I'll relate it quickly now to you and others listening. It was kind of interesting. Years ago, we were teaching the global technology team, global capital markets technology team at Bank of America. So we had 1,100 people in multiple courses around the world, in London, Chicago, Charlotte, New York, and elsewhere. And one of the things they wanted was an advanced course on mortgage-backed securities. Now, this was for technologists. This was not for traders. This was not for bankers, for underwriters, or anything else. So the theory that the senior executives had was that everyone knows what a mortgage is. Everyone knows what a mortgage-backed security is. So the instructor started the course with fairly advanced concepts, what are called IOPOs, which is interest-only or principal-only mortgage strips. Now, there was dead silence in the room. And then we realized that this was just way beyond. Now, what happened was we changed the curriculum on the fly and immediately started talking about mortgages. Does everyone know what a mortgage is? Most of the hands went up, but some didn't. Okay. How many know? And someone then asked, is my home equity line of credit a mortgage? So these are fundamental questions. And I always say, if you don't ask the questions, don't expect, to feel like you're in the right place. You're going to be lost. So what you're talking about is building the fundamental building blocks so that you get it right, and then you can speak the language of the people in your business. Otherwise, you're going to be very lost, and you're not going to be very useful. And I think that it's that example also of the co-pilot who doesn't tell the pilot or ask the pilot or point out to the pilot something. So you're pointing out some very fundamental things that anyone who's building software or systems or managing them or business people involved need to be able to ask. If you're not sure, ask. There's no stupid question or no silly question, depending on how you want to look at it. So these are fundamental things. Have you done, what's your biggest sort of, I'll call it the aha moment from the student's perspective? What do you think when you talk to, with the few minutes we have left, I want to say, when you talk to a student and they suddenly get what you're talking about? I mean, first, it went from the pushback that you just described to, oh, JR, Dr. Ryu is really right. I get it. So what do you think is that moment? Where can you give us some examples of that moment where it really changed that person's learning and their perspective on what they need to know in their work?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, actually. Thanks for asking the question. And this is something I want to always convey with my students. And until you put something in a context, if you're just trying to, pass the course, or if you're just trying to get a piece of paper, in the form of a certification, I mean, those aha moments may never occur.
Right.
So you really want to put it in a sort of a context, in a real life situation. And what happens a lot of times with my students is, they complain, they, give me bad teaching evaluation, scores and those types of bad things. And then after like 5 years, after they start working in industry, they get back to me and say, "Oh, Dr. Ryu, thank you so much for what you did for me. Now I know what you're talking about." So what that means is, like I said earlier, until you're really trying to tackle these real life problems and challenges, you don't really understand the true connections and the relevance of what we're talking about in these classes.
Right.
So I would really try to do as much or as many hands-on exercises as possible when you're trying to learn these concepts. That's how you make the connections, and that's how you make those aha moments occur during the learning process.
No, it's actually fascinating. No, it's fascinating point. And it's kind of a point I'll talk about just from my own little experience. It was very similar. I was in my teens. My parents sent my brother and I to this thing called National Outdoor Leadership School in Wyoming, which many of you may have heard of Outward Bound. It's very similar to Outward Bound. It's founded around the same time. And it was a 30 days in the wilderness with a bunch of instructors who told you everything. How to climb mountains, how to use carabiners, how to watch for the sharp rocks in the frozen, mountain lakes, or the cold mountain lakes. And all these things. And I came back at the end of that, just like you're describing with your students. I thought my parents were trying to torture us. I thought they were trying to get rid of us, And then 3 years later, my brother and I said, that was the best life experience. Putting you in the moment where you have to really try and see what it is all about. Because even the experts, an expert will find they're learning all the time because things happen differently. So yeah, the ability to, and that doesn't mean someone takes a challenge in the example that I used of, climbing the highest mountain and going off the steepest cliff to begin with. You start in baby steps.
Oh, no. I think that's really important because, one of the things that really kills your motivation is trying to solve, these problems much more challenging than you're capable of solving at that moment. Right. So I really like that idea of baby steps. Mm-hmm. Then that way you can get a little more confidence every time you are able to solve the problem, and you build on it and move forward. To be able to solve these bigger problems later on. It's almost like practicing the piano, right? So you run into these small challenges, and you overcome it, and eventually you become this great pianist.
Right.
So
no, it's actually it's kind of we've described it, and we've kind of had this mantra over many years of running training courses. It's knowledge, skills, and confidence. Mm-hmm. If you don't have the confidence, you could be the most knowledgeable, skillful, and you're going to be that co-pilot who says nothing when we're out of fuel, or you're going to be the person who says, "I'm pretty sure I think there's a cybersecurity hole," but says nothing about it. So having confidence doesn't mean arrogance, obviously, but it means having the ability to raise your hand and ask a question. And that, I think, is what I would say. You probably can confirm this, that instructors love when people ask questions.
Yeah, and it also shows that you're interested, right?
Exactly.
You want to show that you're engaged, and you want to be a member of this team, and also want to contribute to the success of the team. So that's how you show your enthusiasm and your engagement.
Yeah, I've often been accused of being too enthusiastic, and that could be a detriment as well. But I think absolutely, whether it's in a classroom or whether it's in the real world, the minute you go in and demonstrate your passion, your passion is not just I know everything. Passion is I don't know everything, but I'm hungry. Feed me.
Yeah, by the end of the process, let's say you get your PhD, the biggest lesson you're learning is you don't know anything.
Right. No, that's absolutely right. The more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. And people have said to me, "Paul, you've been to so many countries. Wow, you've traveled the world, 45 countries." And I go, yeah, you know what I know? I know nothing. I have seen a tiny fraction of the world. Forget even the fact that I've been to India 20 times, and there's so many parts of India that I've not seen. That's my Indian friends joke. I've been to India more times than they have. But then I realized I've never been to Korea. I've never been to parts of most of Africa. So it's kind of fascinating. The more you know, the more you realize how little we know, and that's kind of what Einstein says. It's like so anyway. But I think that we're on a mission to really help people develop their own genius. We're on a mission. I think you are on that mission with us. JR's on our board. We're excited to have him. He's really provided the kind of great insights and sort of learning moments here for us as a company, because we never will stop learning. And we hope to be able to pass that on to everyone else in their own journeys. So were there any other things that you wanted to sort of pass along in the last moments we have?
Yeah, I want to just end our conversation with this idea of never giving up, especially with learning, and actually be always willing to learn. Once you start learning, that's how you end your career. So, especially in IT,
Yeah.
so you have to be eager to learn and you have to enjoy learning. And that's one of the things I want to teach to my students. You have to learn how to enjoy learning.
Yeah. And the more you learn, as we just said, the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know, and then you want to pass that knowledge along. So.
And the process will be painful, but you will get the rewards at the end of the day.
Okay, thanks, JR. Thanks for the wonderful time here, and we'll push this out, and hopefully everyone will have an opportunity to review it later. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.